So this might be more of a controversial talk than Ben's, but we'll see how it works out. I'll start with a little bit about me. The title, I can't even remember what it means, to be honest. I think it's about bridging the gap, which was the whole idea. But it took me a while to remember how to say it, so I'm not going to try and pronounce it because I'll fuck it up. So we'll do that one in minutes. So why am I here? I'm, as Mark mentioned, I'm from Hurst. I run a small web development company just over in Gateshead. We're mostly back-end focused, but because we're mostly back-end focused, that means that we have ample opportunity for working with both contracted and freelance and agency-driven front-end developers. So we get a bit of a mix. We're mostly about web apps, APIs and integrations, so we'll do all the stuff that I guess most of you guys don't really want to touch. I've been a developer for over 8 years. That's both back-end and front-end. I kind of dibble and dabble between them. I'm mostly a back-end developer. But how many of you... we'll do this now as a bit of a show of hands. Ben asked as well, and I'll do the same thing. How many of you are actually front-end developers? How many of you also consider yourself to kind of transcend and do the back-end as well? Ooh, that's a lot. Right, okay, that's actually probably more than I expected. Right, we'll see how that works. So do you guys consider yourself to be that word, full-stack developers? Yeah? Very good, excellent. And finally, I work with a team of multi-talented developers. Our dev team is fantastic. We've got one of them here tonight, Nathan. And slight plug, we are also on the lookout for a new back-end dev. Every time I come, we're always on the lookout for a developer because we always seem to need them. If anybody's interested in working for us, it's mostly PHP, but you can come and grab me afterwards, that's fine. I'm not worried about interrupting talk at the moment. So, I thought that the best way to start working out how we can transcend between back-end and front-end, or how back-end and front-end can work together, was to go all the way back to where the whole front-end role came from in the first place. I'm sure you'll probably, some of you hopefully won't, but most of you will probably remember when the internet used to look like this. When we used to spend a lot of our time trying to get things to work in various browsers, when everything had to work exactly the same. There was none of this progressive enhancement nonsense. It had to work in every browser and it had to work in every resolution, and somehow we all just accepted that. That was all okay. I remember spending a lot of my time fixing various bugs in Internet Explorer 6, I seem to remember. We still have several projects that we need to maintain in that, so it wasn't time wasted anyway, so that wasn't too bad. There are still some websites out there that look fairly comparable to this. We work on one, it's called Ling's Car. You've heard this one before. This is a bit of a sort of in-joke. I have to put this on every single presentation I do. But it was the way we did things, it was the way things worked. Back then, when I worked at Ling's Cars all those years ago, I had to do absolutely everything, all the way from interaction design all the way through to server management, which was really quite horrendous. So back then, there wasn't really a difference between front-end developers and back-end developers. We were all just called web developers, and that was all right, that was fine. We sort of left the web and the graphic designers to do their bit, and we came in and mishmashed it all together and made it work using Macromedia flash clearing a lot of the time. That was kind of the way it worked. JavaScript was a little bit different. HTML and CSS were all well, not quite the same way they were now anyway. So that's kind of how it all started. That was a nice sort of way to start things off. But then things began to change, things began to evolve. We all ended up with one of these, and that kind of changed the way that things needed to be thought about. Suddenly this term of responsive design appeared. And the need to specialise became more and more apparent as time went on. Suddenly being a web developer wasn't good enough. We needed people who could specialise in back-end development and specialise in front-end development. The skills were so large that we needed to segregate those. The languages themselves became increasingly more complex. CSS back in the day just used to be making things red and bold and flash on Link's cards anyway. And nowadays it's a lot more difficult than that. JavaScript's role in particular is what I'm going to talk about quite a lot tonight, because since most of you seem to transcend the gap between back-end and front-end, I imagine that most of you spend a lot of time doing JavaScript, and this is from what I've done a little bit of research on, this seems to be the deciding factor. I'll talk to some front-end developers and they'll think that JavaScript is perfectly part of their job. It's not just about doing little jQuery bits, it's about connecting to the API, it's about building another application on the front end rather than just on the back end. And other people will say, no, I really don't want to do that, that's not for me, that's more of a back end role, I really can't, I don't see myself needing to do that specialism. So this is where I'm going to try and take things from and see where it goes. Now, right back then, JavaScript used to look like this. I still can't quite figure out why this function ever existed, but every site that was ever built in Dreamweaver ended up with the mn_openbr window function. This, noticeably, is version 2.0. I don't know what it does differently from version 1.0. It seems to still just pass things straight through the window to open. But this was what we had to deal with. This was fine. Target equals blank. That wasn't necessary. No. We needed everything to open in a pop-up. Otherwise, nobody would know what they were doing with it. So this was how it all started, and then, I mean, I'm old enough sadly to remember, or been doing this long enough to remember when all of this came in, and suddenly not having to code your own Ajax function was a lovely thing. Suddenly we had everything in jQuery and this kind, and suddenly everything changed a little bit. It wasn't just about small effects and small interactions on the front. The front end itself became another application that was driven from the back end. And everyone's role became a little bit different. I'm sure that most of you deal with $.ajax on a daily basis, so you all know what that does, so we don't need to discuss that. But now we have things that are even more different. We've got several different frameworks. And myriad was the word I chose that was the most positive. I'm one of the people who thinks that there are really quite far too many JavaScript frameworks and we don't really need any more. A plethora, etc. There's lots of different ones. Angular and React and back one of the ones I pulled out. I'm sure I'll offend several people by not bringing up the framework that they use. But these are the ones that we seem to mostly deal with these days. This effectively means that web applications themselves, rather than needing to be sculpted by back-end code, can now be completely driven from JavaScript. All you need is a RESTful API, and you've got an application. That's all you need. ECMAScript 6 is now coming. It seems to be taking off a little bit more. This is going to turn JavaScript, which is still a bit of a half-arsed language sometimes, into something that's going to be properly object-driven. It's going to have classes, it's going to have all these new things that lots of other languages have had for a while. And that means that it's going to become a full-on job. We've already got people who are effective JavaScript developers, but how does this affect the role of the front-end developer? How does it affect all sorts of things? JavaScript itself is blurring the boundaries between what a front-end developer is. Front-end developers, should they, like I've said before, should they actually need to know about JavaScript? Is this a role that may even need to be a specialism in itself, or is this something that the back-end developer needs to get involved in? To be perfectly honest, I don't have the answer to this. It depends of the size of team you're working in. When Ben was up here, he works in a very large thing in the government. He's very lucky to do that. Normally I have to do absolutely everything from answering the phone to typing out HTML. That's pretty much what I do all day. And JavaScript itself, finally, we've been using this quite a lot in our place. It's now a server-side language as well. You literally just need to use JavaScript to do the whole lot, to write the API and to use it. This is only ever going to change. The rules between front-end developers and back-end developers are just going to keep blurring even more. So, what can we do about that? What can we do to make sure that back-end developers and front-end developers can still work effectively with each other? Well, this bit is how I've been dealing with things. These are the bits that I'm going to talk about here are strictly my opinions. Only these are sort of tried and tested methods based on some front-end developers that I've worked with in the past, and these have been very, very helpful. So, since a lot of you guys are back-end developers, this should hopefully help point you in the right direction of what you can do when you're working within your teams. This is a little bit up, so we're back to the front-end wall. I thought this was earlier on. You can tell I practiced this, can't you? Logic, that's the first thing. APIs are normally, I would hope, are defined by the back-end developer. They'll deliver an application programming interface that then can be consumed by someone on the front. Now, APIs work in very different ways. Sometimes they're RESTful, sometimes it's literally a few variables inside of a template file that you need to render some HTML. It covers a myriad of different topics. They're normally supposed to be able to be implemented by the front-end developer, although I've seen a lot of places where this is kind of what I tend to do. I tend to write stubs and examples for the developers that I'm passing them over to. I have met a lot of back-end developers, I'm not mentioning any names obviously, who will literally pass a set of templates over to the front-end developer and say, here you go, I can't remember what variables are in that file, you'll just have to find out for yourself. How are they supposed to do that? What sort of level of teamwork is that? So I tend to write what is probably slightly horrendous code. Hopefully you all can see this. I think the slides are going up online afterwards, just in case they don't come out. I'll tend to write these little stubs in between the code if I'm going to pass this on to someone else. Because I don't want to dictate what they're going to do with their JavaScript. If they want to do it in separate files, if they want to build a full MVC framework for their JavaScript, that's fine. That's not my job. I'm not the front-end developer. I'll let them handle that. All I want to do is show how I think the pagination can work, how it can load, where it's going to come from. And so what I'll do is I'll just code up a little stub method here, fetch pages, which pulls down all the pages that we're going to be using on this and builds them straight into our pagination up here. You'll know I forgot to include the ARIA role. Oops, you can tell I'm not very good at front end, can't you? And then I'll just handle exactly what's going to happen when we'll click on that. How is that going to work? Those of you who really do this every day will notice that up here I've decided to include an ID and then use a class. So my code won't even really work. So this is why we shouldn't let back-end developers touch JavaScript. Exactly. Secondly, there's templating. This is another one where it can get a little bit difficult depending on how everything works. Now, the templating language, in my experience, is normally something that's chosen by the back-end developer. It could be anything. It could be raw PHP, which is especially a horrible thing to have to deal with. It could be Blade, which is the new Laravel one that's not too bad, but still not great. Or it could be Twig, or it could be any of the even multiple JavaScript template engines that are out there. Like there's Mustache, there's EJS, there's Jade now, which doesn't even look like HTML. It looks like something completely different. So how the front-end developers are supposed to, they don't need to know about all of these templating languages. They don't need to know how all the logic is going to work. They just want to go ahead and write the code that's going to make the site. So I'll normally tend to write examples and guides in my templates. I'll build a very, very short example in horrendous HTML of how I think it's going to work, and then they can take it from there and see where it's going to go from. This is an example in Twig. So here we have our pagination example again, but this time instead of it being implemented in JavaScript, we're just going to chuck it straight in there, straight from the PHP. At the top of the file, whatever the templating file might be about, I'll normally tend to include a little bit of an index about which variables are available. Because let's face it, they don't want to be looking at the backend code to try and figure it out. So we may as well give them a little bit of an API description here. That would help a lot, wouldn't it? And then I'll write a little bit of logic underneath to demonstrate how it comes together. Normally that will be enough, and I normally won't get ratty emails or Slack messages saying, I really don't understand what on earth you're on about. Normally that's enough to kind of do everything. But even just a little bit like this can make all the difference in working together and making sure that front-end development and making sure that you guys as front-end developers know exactly what to do. The whole idea is to share the load. Working on these sites, although it's fun, and that's the whole idea, we enjoy our jobs, it's a challenging thing sometimes, and without being able to discuss things, without being able to work together, it's going to be even more difficult. The whole idea of pointing someone in the right direction can make all the difference. The main thing though is to share the load with testing. What we've found in the past is that because we do the back end, we'll kind of go, alright, no problem, we've built our side to work, You go ahead and do the front end and come back to us when it's all done and we'll bill you, because I like that part, the billing bit, that's especially nice. That doesn't always work. Requirements change, the project itself is meant, the design might need to work in a different way from where it is, and we tend to try and get involved a lot more now in the user testing as well. As a back-end developer, I prefer to sit there and see how my code is being used on the front, how my APIs are being used, whether it's working in the way I expected or whether I need to rethink what I put together would work in a better way. So the teamwork aspect of it is the most important, I think. Finally, I'll go through a couple of little bits of what you can do as front-end developers, or what maybe little things for you to look into. I couldn't find a slightly better name, so I had to stick with Uncle Sam on that one. It's a little bit American for my liking. As back-end developers, these are things that I've learned in the past that may be less applicable to you guys, but these may just be really, really obvious. I don't know, but this is all about sharing experience, isn't it? Number one, don't make assumptions. I've done this before. I've gone, he'll obviously know what I mean with that. That'll be no problem at all. Yeah, it doesn't ever work that way. Without even slightly writing a slight example or just that teeny weeny bit of documentation like I did before, it can really make all the difference. You've got no idea how much more easy you might be making someone's life, or just how much time you're saving on your project. Secondly, don't overcomplicate things. I know that as a back-end developer, you really want to try the latest and greatest templating language on your system this time. And I know that it's really nice and it's really fast and it looks lovely. But if the front-end developer can't make head or tail of it, is it really worth doing? Is it really a good idea? It could be sometimes. A little example goes a long way, like what I've showed you before. Definitely 100% this one. I still get a few people every now and then that are using raw PHP as a front end. If you're building an application and it's not just a small website and you're actually going to be working in a team with a front end developer, for God's sake, don't give them PHP. No, none of us as back-end developers even like using it. Why would you put it on the front end then? That's just horrible. And finally, as a back-end developer, I really can't stress this one enough, do not touch any of the markup on the CSS that your front-end developer has written. You might be very tempted to say, we'll have that class in there, we'll do this, but for God's sake, don't do it. You will make an enemy for life. I've learned this in the past. Now finally, front-end developers. Don't be afraid of templating languages. Most of them, especially in PHP, tend to do the same sort of thing. It's very basic logic, if, else, end if, for loops, for each loop, stuff like this. Have a go. Once you've got, if you've got a nice example that's been presented to you by a back-end developer, hopefully that will be enough for you to crack on with. This is one that's kind of crossing the boundary about what I've talked about before. There seems to be a convention that either back-end developers will do all of the JavaScript or front-end developers will do all of the JavaScript. I think this is something that should be shared. You guys should be working on it together. I think that's the way it works. Without doing it that way, you've got no idea how everything's going to come together. You could both be working in complete isolation, come up with completely different sets of JavaScript, and it could all mishmash and cause all sorts of problems. Half of it is going to want to is going to want to do effects and drag the interface, and half of it is going to want to pull data down. And this all should really be working from one application. It shouldn't be two disparate things, which is what I often see. And finally, it shouldn't really be so much of a thing to communicate with each other, should it? No one person is an island. Don't sit there trying to figure everything out, or sit there getting confused, or sit there getting annoyed. Communication is the main thing. Talk to each other, learn from each other. Finally, teamwork. I thought I'd end on a very, very basic slide, but that's kind of what it's all about. We all work together in a team, we're all trying to deliver the same thing. Whether you're a back-end developer, a front-end developer, or whether you are whether you're a full-stack developer, work together and make sure that what you deliver is going to be just that much better. That's it, that's all I've got. Thank you very much. Questions? Yep.
Some people that be sending helpful snippets. Have you ever explored using self-referencing APIs?
Whenever we're writing an API that doesn't use whenever it doesn't use a templating language like that, we'll tend to use there's that nice one now that read the docs that generates a nice sort of documentation link for APIs. We'll tend to self-document things is something that we've done in the past certainly, but I'm a bit mad. I'm one of those developers who sit there and meticulously describe every descriptive function, even if it literally gets the pages, and the function is called get pages. I'll write a comment above it that says this function gets the pages, just in case somebody just missed it. So self-documenting APIs are, well, it will save a lot of time for the back-end developers, certainly. If that's something that as front-end developers you guys would feel comfortable reading, going through and having a look at that, then yeah, but I tend to write documentation alongside of it, just because I always start out with best intentions, and then the project always gets a bit bigger than it first thought, and the API always gets slightly more complicated than what I originally thought. So hopefully that's all.
So I might not explain it very well. I can't remember the names of the tools, but it's certainly exists for C# and Node, where it'll pull out parameters of your actual function, say, so this API next X, Y, Z, and based on the return type, it will return you whatever.
Right.
And it auto generates those documents for you.
Okay.
So you can actually access documentation through the API.
Right. I haven't come across those before.
I'll try and remember the names.
Yeah, that would be great, because if we'll tweet them on from the Northeast and then we can push them out, that would be great, because I haven't come across those before, so no, that sounds brilliant, that sounds great. Any other questions? Yeah?
I think you said something a bit interesting about the back-end developer should define the API. Is that something you agree with?
It's something that I've found in the past. I guess it's probably, this may come from my own nature of being a slight control freak, and the fact that normally whenever I want to try it, because I'll sort of be speccing the project out from the start as well in my role, so normally that's where I've come from in the past. It might be something that you've met with a different approach for.
I just wanted to kind of raise the point that when you write an API, the person that's using it is kind of your user, and you should think about user needs. So it might be that it's better for the front-end guy to say, or girl, this is what I want, and then the back-end developer to kind of bend over backwards to meet that.
Yeah.
I don't subscribe to the notion of being a front-end or a back-end developer, that's it. So, but I just thought user needs was a buzzword I throw APIs there.
Yeah, so the API you feel that it should be designed more for the user rather than sort of me dictating exactly what it should.
Yeah,
I think that's a very valid point. Yeah, I agree with that.
It brings it brings it closer to the problem domain, right?
Not very, very interesting. Thanks, yeah.
When you find something up for some front-end design work, you provide a provision environment for it, so saying, like, how do you get a dev to kind of...
Yes, normally what will happen is I'll set everything up in such a way that we have a shared development environment. So we normally work with Git. We'll be using Git to build things together. But any pushes up to the development branch will immediately push straight onto our shared thing. So we can both work together. We can both see exactly what's happening with it. So that's normally how we found that that's worked well in the past.
Do you go as far as writing like a vagrant setup? So
we have done Vagrant in the past, but even now, we've been using Vagrant in Hurst for 2 years, and our machines, sort of 80% of the time, are fine, and then every now and then we have little problems with them, and it's something that I don't really feel I shouldn't be pushing the way that we do things if it doesn't work 100% for us onto someone else. So I normally try and set up a joint development environment in such a way that they can be pushing things up to Git. They can set up their local environment, I'll give them a database and everything like that, and normally we'll have a protected way of them getting to that. But otherwise, we just use that. The Vagrant setup hasn't worked well for us in the past, to be honest.
Sorry. I was just wondering, based on like the communication side of it, how do you tackle if you create a second version of your API, so you want the version, obviously you don't want to really affect existing people. How do you communicate that across teams?
So normally, if we're going to break the API, I will try and, normally by this point I've hopefully talked to the rest of our guys, and we've all decided, including any externals that we may be working with, that this is the way to go and this is how we should do it. And we'll all be wary that at this point I'm going to push this code up and this is going to change what's going to happen. I'll normally write a staging function. in such a way that we've got both versions of it working at the same time, and then after a while we'll say, okay, now we're going to turn it off, so then we'll have like a week or so, depending on how long the project is.
So keep both versions, so you don't have V1.
Not if it's something that hasn't made it to production yet. No, if it's made it to production, then yes, I will tend to keep the version that is already there. And I guess the API version is a whole other half-hour talk, to be honest. Yeah. But if it's in production, yes. If it's not, no, we'll just work it out to it. I think that's it.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Jim.